started, well, part of the thinking here began by reading a magazine article about those meal replacement products. It was a story about a product called Soylent. And it's a powder that you add water and oil to and you shake it up, and it will provide full nutrition for a human being for a day. And the person who developed it was very proud of it. It would make life easier. You didn't need a kitchen. You could nourish yourself while you were driving your car. Okay, and the title of the magazine article was The End of Food. And at the time, when I read it, I thought, no, this is not the end of food, because it's still food, but I think it's the end of meals. I actually am not sure about that. Now, I think maybe we shouldn't call those substances food, but that's like a question for this event, maybe. But then, my own children, like the one who ordered the dog's breakfast, I mean, they've sometimes bought similar products that are just weird. I'm expressing my judgment. These supposedly nourishing powders that you can substitute for eating decent food with your family. Anyway, so it got me worried. What would we lose if we stopped having meals? Okay. Sort of around the same time, I was making an argument in an essay about food and meals and art, where I was going to say, yes, I think food can be art, one of the questions people have been discussing at this event, but I wanted to say meals cannot be art. And here I'm kind of just quoting myself. Like, what did I say in 2014? Well, why is it that meals cannot be art? Too many processes and projects converge in meals. A meal does not have the focus and integrity that we ask artworks to have. A necessary condition for artworks is that they provide, this isn't even a slideshow. I'm like, sorry, not really on the ball here. That's why I'm confused. Okay. An artwork has to provide an ambitious focus for appreciation. It isolates something for our attention and response. But in a meal, no element, not even the necessary element of food, needs to be the center of attention. There is no focus for appreciation. Now, what I'm going to do today is, in a sense, just try to go after this argument again. I felt like I did it very sketchily then. I'm going to maybe do it kind of sketchily again once more, but I'm trying to sharpen it, trying to make it a better argument. And the terms I'm going to use have to do with the way we relate to meaning in art and in meals. Okay, so here's just the overview of what I'm doing. I'm going to try to say art aims to enable an intimate relation between subjective experience, access to meaning, and appreciation. I think that's relevant. A number of the things that have been discussed here, I think that could help me say that better. But anyway, meanwhile, meals help us to have recognizable, meaning-bearing lives, but not because at a meal our experience, our understanding, and our appreciation give us good access to their meaning. That is to meals meaning. The meaning of meals is to be enacted and accumulated. The meaning of art is to be experienced. Okay? And make that contrast. And I'm going to say really briefly again, it's obvious that in the life of a person, we need both kinds of meaningful practice. Okay, so what is a meal and how can meaning be assigned to meals? Well, I'm not really going to define them, but I am going to say some things that I think you have to say to understand what a meal is. Meals are a way of incorporating the project of nutrition into human life through regular patterns of eating. Okay, if we had no patterns of eating, I don't think we would have meals. Okay? Now I'm just going to quote an anthropologist, Mary Douglas, and she's kind of a structuralist, I guess. But anyway, she's actually quoting somebody else's account of meals. But so there's a notion of a food event. A food event is an occasion when food is taken without prejudice as to whether it constitutes a meal or not. A structured event is a social occasion which is organized according to rules prescribing time, place, and sequence of actions. So if food is taken as part of a structured event, then we have a meal. And then she goes on to talk about meals versus snacks, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, the meal, by contrast with the snack, has no self-contained food items and is strongly rule-bound as to permitted combinations and sequences. So someone was talking about like having the sweet before the savory. Well, that would be a violation of a very, at least in certain traditions, a real meal rule. So let's say a meal is a food event structured in itself. That is, there's some like relationship between items or kinds of the qualities of things that are occurring in the meal, and it's identifiable via these expectations for repeated time, setting, and social participation in the meal. Okay, so I realize this isn't that illuminating, but it's a basic idea. Okay, so now I'm going to give you some examples. Just ways people talk about meals where I think they're trying to assign meaning to meals. So this is that anthropologist Mary Douglas, and she studied British, what she called working class meals in the 1970s. And the little passage I'm going to quote from her concerns a meal, which she calls it a meal, even though all it involves is a hot drink and a biscuit on Sunday night. Sort of the end of the week or the beginning of the whatever. And she's already described the Sunday dinner, which we were talking about earlier, which is a very heavy meal that ends with a very wet pudding. Followed later, like maybe early evening, by tea, where you would have a kind of tea cake or something that might have some fruit in it, but it's much less wet. It's toasted, perhaps, and some other things. But then later in the evening, you have this biscuit and your hot beverage. Okay. So here's what she says. I realize this is a long passage, but you'll just see why I want it all. When it comes to the final course of the main meal, that's the Sunday dinner, or the last meal on Sunday night, the range of sweet biscuits reveals the pudding from the dinner again, in its most desiccated form. In its most desiccated forms. Currant biscuits, sugar-coated biscuits, jam-scented biscuits. Nowhere else in the world is there a steady demand for small, geometrically shaped sweet biscuits with a layer of jam or cream in the middle and coated with icing at a sufficiently modest price to permit them a regular place in the daily menu. Insofar as the sweet biscuit eaten last thing at night on Sunday is a dry version of the cake that you have at tea, and the cake, a dry version of the pudding that you have at dinner, we can regard the biscuit not merely as an irrelevant conclusion, but as a summary form, literally, of those courses. The biscuit is capable of standing for all the sequences of puddings through the year, and of wedding cakes and christening cakes through the life cycle. Okay. And as someone who moved to the UK, I can say I really like this passage because I had wondered about the role of the biscuit. This was a huge array of really dry biscuits. So there's some like the custard cream, the bourbon cream,
Jammy Dodger.
Thank you, Aaron. The Jammy Dodger. Okay. Now, Maybe it's hard to confirm a claim like this about the biscuit standing for all of this. But I'm trying to say I don't think it would be disconfirmed by British biscuit eaters denying that the Sunday night biscuit played that role. They might say, no, we just like them, or it's nice to have a biscuit before you go to bed. It seems quite possible that the biscuits are a desiccated, visually articulated symbol of more rich, messy, celebratory food events. But no one, I'm claiming, has to experience this meaning when eating the biscuit, dipping it in your tea or whatever, and it would be perhaps even odd, possibly disruptive of that meaning if you did experience it that way. Example 2, won't say much about this, but you know about the Benedictine Rule that gave monks many prescriptions for how to live, including really elaborate rules for how to hold a meal. Like you weren't supposed to talk. Well, somebody was talking as they were reading from scripture, but everyone else was supposed to be silent. Okay? So here's someone, Roy Strong has written a book that documents a lot of what he calls feasting practices through mainly the Western tradition. He says, this was the meal as a form of spiritual communion with the mind lifted heavenwards by the text being read aloud, away from any consideration of what was being eaten. But then he actually, the meaning he wants to give to this has to do with how it initiated certain kinds of secular etiquette, as it enacted, in his words, deference, courtesy, and consideration for one's fellows, all attributes essential to the evolution of table manners. Okay. Here's another example. This is a sociologist, Joanne Finkelstein, who wrote about dining out. I think the book is from the 1980s, so she's writing about sort of the second half of the 20th century dining out in an urban setting. So, she says, commonly dining out is seen as an expression of one's individuality. It can be regarded as a demonstration of what we value and desire. We pick a restaurant and so forth. However, she says, the styles of interaction encouraged in a restaurant produce an uncivilized sociality. It allows us to act in imitation of others, in accord with images, without need for thought or self-scrutiny. It must be considered a practice which weakens our participation in the social arena, even as it appears to increase that participation. So she talks about things about, like, how you can ignore your fellow diners when you're at a restaurant. They're right next to you, but you don't have to pay any attention to them. You can treat your waiter or waitress in a certain non-really engaging way. So. Last example, this is from a book by Meredith Abarca, where a lot of it is interviews that she's done with Mexican and Mexican-American women on their memories of eating in their childhood and as they moved, say, to the U.S. So this is excerpts from an interview she did with a woman who's sort of an aunt of hers, Licha. Okay. So Licha says, my mother is one of those people whose salsas are always delicious. What did she put in it? I think all the love in the world, so that she could feed so many. Licha talks about how there would often be like 12 people for dinner or at the table. My mother had faith that when you shared the food that God gives you with someone, you would never be without food. And then she's talking about the tables and benches. Everything was rustic back then, and we didn't appreciate those things, right? But now I would want to have those benches and table. Those tablecloths, they were hand embroidered. I am telling you, were so beautiful. But understand that my mother did not go to school. She was born and died illiterate. But she never let anyone to come to the table naked. They had to at least have a t-shirt. She would say that food was blessed. Thanks to God, we were never hungry because my mother was luchona, a fighter to make food. She says a bunch of other quite interesting things about what they ate, but I won't. Okay. So I'm going to make some really simple points on the basis of some very, I think those examples are all quite rich and complicated. I just want to say two simple things. One, that they are very different from each other. They're going in all these different directions. The meals are holding meaning as signs of love or of an individual's strength. In Finkelstein's account, they show you diluted individual expression and collective failure of civility, or maybe it's an enactment of an ideal of religious order and reverence, or it's a formally structured symbol of a secular culture. But these accounts do not claim coherence with or aim to resolve disparities between the meanings being attributed and how a given person participating in such meals would experience them. So my claim is that the child, so this was Licha as an adult, but as a child, I don't think she would have had to, I don't think she would have been thinking, my mother is a fighter, or she loves us, and that's why her salsa tastes so good. But I think it actually could be quite important to the meaning of those meals that, that they were showing the fight in the water, or the beauty of the linens on the table. I really doubt that you would be thinking, oh, what beautiful tablecloths we have. And yet, that aesthetic dimension of those meals, it seems to me, is significant. It's part of what made them the meals they were. Or the modern restaurant diner, that's completely explicit in Finkelstein's account that the modern restaurant, the diner thinks she's doing one thing and she's really doing something actually completely different. The monks, who knows what the monks were thinking? They might have actually been really enjoying this chance to sit and be quiet and just eat food. Who know, they didn't have to be raising their minds to God or experiencing what seems to me like an incredible suppression of sociality. But who knows what they were thinking? But that Benedictine Rule practice could still have carried that meaning in those meals. And similarly, as I already said, with the British biscuit eater, I don't think the participants have to experience the meals on those terms in order for the meals to have these meanings. Okay. Now, I'm just going to sort of avoid a hard question, or at least I find it hard. How would you justify and confirm claims to meal meaning? I don't really know. I'll say something, but I will say, I'm not trying to defend any of these meaning claims. I want the diversity of meaning claims, and I'm hoping you would find it plausible that there is diverse meaning that accumulates in meals. I just want this lack of concern for joining up what it is like to participate in and experience those meals and the significance of those meals. We're just not really trying to connect those. So I'm not going to say much, but maybe you could say, well, suppose something is going to be a source of meal meaning. It has to have an intelligible way of explaining or giving point to some features of the meal, where those features are realized in what the participants do. Like the meaning can't be completely detached from what is happening in the actual meal, but maybe it also has to help distinguish a given meal practice from alternatives. How do you recognize that this meal practice is different? Well, this claim about the meaning of it should help you with that. Okay. But I'm just repeating myself, it is not necessary that the sources of meaning play a dominant role in what the meal participants think, feel, notice, like, or dislike about their meal practices. They do not have to be able to trace the features they recognize back to those sources of meaning. Okay, so now let's switch gears and think a little bit about art. How are meaning and experience related in art? Well, I'm just going to articulate what I'm calling a broadly shared modern conception. I realize this, the historical evolution of our notion of art is just a big topic, but I am trying to talk about how I think we think about it right now. That is, we should appreciate a work of art by experiencing it with understanding. Okay, this sounds too obvious. Artworks are things we try to experience and know unusually well. Okay, I think this has been showing up maybe in Mohan's talk this morning. And if you have an appreciation of an artwork that does not emerge from this experience-laden understanding, it's inadequate. And I'm just going to give you some quotes where I think people with actually quite different views, they're saying a very similar thing, or I think saying a similar thing. So here's Malcolm Budd saying, appreciation of a work of art is not a matter of knowing what its aesthetic properties are, but of perceiving them as realized in the work. So that perceptual experience with the work where you get the properties in that experience. Here's Mary Mothersill. To be appreciated, music must be listened to but also heard. Paintings must be looked at but also seen. Poems not only read but understood. This is a little bit elliptical maybe, but she's trying to get at the real experience of the thing in which you get to what is to be appreciated in the music, painting, or poem. Here's Richard Volheim. Part of coming to understand a work of art is learning how to perceive it. So these are integrated processes, perception and understanding. Criticism, sort of a word for appreciation, he says, or he's going to call it the process of coming to understand a particular work of art. Okay, so that's just a gesture at how people talk about this. Okay, let me just give a couple of art examples that I've chosen because, they involve meals or the depiction of meals. So Judy Chicago's work, The Dinner Party, which is it's sort of a sculpture. And I'm just giving you a long description of it, and you'll sort of see. What I'm interested in is the intense attention to what everything in the work is there for. The Dinner Party revises the history of Western culture by naming and symbolizing in visual form 1,038 women from various historical periods. 999 of them are named on luminous porcelain floor tiles, and the 39 honorees at the dinner table, it's this sort of triangular table, are symbolically represented through elaborate needlepoint runners, in large part work in techniques drawn from the period in which each woman lived. And ceramic plates with centralized motifs and vulvar imagery, Chicago's integration of media associated with women's labor in the domestic sphere, needlework, ceramics, and china painting, into this monumental artwork produces an explosive collision between aesthetics, the public domain of the High Art Museum, and the domestic kitsch, the private domain of women's space, the home. Okay, so you can see, she's really, Amelia Jones, the art historian, is trying to pull in, why all of this, Chicago has all of this coming together in this depiction, sort of a meal. And I'm saying, of course, it would be unthinkable to do this at dinner, well, we'll see, at dinner tonight. Okay. Here's a little bit more about this, dinner party. So this is one of the place settings, and this is just the cloth underneath it, and I'll give you somebody else's description of what's going on about the needlework. The runner for Petronilla de Meath, a 14th century Irish woman tortured and burned as a witch, is a Celtic interlace pattern executed in couched fleece and wrapped cords to create a high relief. The strong interlace design also comes up and invades the area of the table and appears to attack and engulf the plate. So I guess you can see I picked this because I think it contrasts so nicely with the mention of the beautiful table linens from Leech's childhood. Like, they were there, they were beautiful, but they weren't to be appreciated the way this, like everything about the needlework, was supposed to carry a punch. What am I doing? How am I doing on time?
You have 15 minutes.
Okay, here's the Last Supper. Or this isn't Da Vinci, it's an engraving of Da Vinci's Last Supper. And I'll just give you a couple of descriptions of it, or kind of interpretive descriptions. So there's a whole book by Ludwig Heidenreich on the Da Vinci painting. He's trying to talk about what gives the painting its power. So he says some things about the depiction of Christ in the middle. He says, here we note another curious thing, the orderly arrangement of the objects on the table in front of Christ. Immediately to the left and right of him, they begin to fall into disarray. Thus, the space before the Lord is prepared for the sacred action which Christ, rising above the wave of emotion still seething around him among the disciples, is making ready to accomplish. So I know you can't really see it, but it is true. That's a nice orderly place setting there, and then sort of mess at the other place setting. Here, Heidenreich quotes this lovely essay that Goethe, the German writer Goethe, wrote about the painting, which he had seen many years ago. But then he had access to this particular engraving, and he says, he's writing about Peter. I'll just tell you what he says. Holding a knife in his right hand, he accidentally and without design touches with the handle of it the side of Judas, by which the attitude of the latter, that is Judas, who is stooping forward as if alarmed, and by this motion overturns a salt cellar, is happily effected. I'm sorry, that's a really complicated sentence, but he's trying to talk about this little bit of the painting. It's like there's a knife there that's hitting Judas's arm, and then there is a salt cellar tipped over. So it's this like little thing that could happen at a meal, of course, but in the painting, you can talk about that and you can think about why it's there, the meaning of that element of the painting. Okay. So I'm claiming artworks ask us to integrate our experience, understanding of meaning, and our appreciation, and that meals do not need or aspire to that kind of integration. Okay, I'll consider some objections very briefly. So, all right, I might say, I think meals and art are importantly similar, and that there is no one authoritative experience of a meal or a work of art. There's huge variability in how people can experience art as well as meals. Okay, my reply, yes, the fact that individual pursuit of this integration project, where you try to experience the thing in a way that shows your understanding and you appreciate it with a package, the fact that we do that and it leads us to interestingly different outcomes is consistent with us sharing a commitment to that integrative ideal and to being open to challenge and improvement. Like we can find out, oh yeah, I didn't really understand, I need to rethink and so on with a work of art. I think this is not a project that we share in meals. We're not responsible for experiencing and understanding a meal. And we are free to ignore, misunderstand, and idiosyncratically dwell on its features. Objection 2. Art practices are parallel to meal practices in that art, too, can be studied from a multitude of perspectives. You can do historical, sociological, economic studies of art that are not going to invoke individual art experience and that can claim to show the meaning of those practices. Studies about the maleness of genius, the notion of the genius, and so on. Okay, I'm going to say, well, I think there's little to no restriction on the perspectives that can be taken to understand meals as meals. The notion of a meal, let's say it's a regularly structured social occasion for eating food, leaves huge scope for possible sources of meaning. And this is maybe the crucial thing I'm pointing again, there's no restriction to features that are open to first-hand experience and understanding with those sources of meal meaning. In contrast, if a claim to understand an art practice in no way assumes or requires that the relevant meaning is responsible to first-hand experience, then it is not offering an understanding of art meaning. This isn't really an argument. This is me just saying, this is what I think to get at art meaning, you've got to take seriously this experiential demand, or aim, anyway. Lastly, and relevant to a number of things people have been saying here, meals can indeed incorporate the aspirations for integrated experience and understanding that I have assigned to art. You can think about the Japanese tea ceremony. There are works by the artist Ryokrit Tiravanit, I think I'm not saying that correctly, where he arranged for, and in some cases cooked, food to be served to gallery visitors for free. Okay, not really going to deal with these examples well because there's a lot to say about them. Partly I would defer you to a really interesting discussion by Yuriko Saito of the tea ceremony. She has a slightly different question in mind, which is the fine art versus everyday aesthetic divide. And she's not willing to put the tea ceremony in the everyday aesthetic camp. She says they're too special. They are too, they make you attend too carefully to your experience. And I want to say, yes, that's right. They're not meals in my sense. There's also a really interesting discussion of the Tiravanit, I know I'm not saying that right, works by Claire Bishop. She thinks those works are trying to do something pretty specific, politically specific, and so they're posing some questions and challenges, and she thinks they failed. But anyway, let's just say that these are food events, but I think they aim to transform the practice of having a meal, which does not require engagement with its own meaningfulness, into an event in which one's experience is in the service of artistic meaning. For me, this is a crucial transformation, introducing demands for focus and appreciation. I'm willing to call such events art, but not meals. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to conclude. And there's, in the written version, I'm trying to bring in some kind of competing ideas from Joseph Margolis and Richard Boheim. I won't really make that clear here, but I think meals are amazingly effective ways of enacting a culture's collective life, making a meaningful material, historical, cultural hybrid out of the satisfaction of a biological need. They're really amazing, I think. They're so productive. And I think if we are to have a life, what I was calling a recognizable life, with more grip on reality than our individually anchored experience and meaning can provide, then these collectively shared meanings have to be realized somehow in our activities. You know, we have to surrender some of the meaning of our activities to what emerges within an enacted collective life. However, you know, in the life of a person, we also need prompts that allow us to assign meaning to our own experience. You know, we need to ask what is interesting, good, and important about our experience, and we need to develop terms for comparison, preference, and choice that we can use for ourselves. Works of art place those demands on us, you know, to take care in building on experience to reach understanding and appreciation of value. I just want to say, well, we need both kinds of meaning making. Thank you.
Ricardo from UNAM is going to reply. We have 10 minutes.
Okay, I really enjoy this paper, so thanks to you for sharing it, and thanks to Paloma Lara for organizing this conference. Yeah, thanks. Okay, in this paper, Eileen sketches a broad conception of how meals are related with their structure and their meaning. Some of the bullet points of this broad conception are here. Meals are structured events, not too little as snacks, but not too much as Japanese tea ceremony. Meals have meanings, many of them, because there are many ways to interpret these things. Maybe partially in virtue of its structure, in virtue of the rules, everything. And people do not experience these meanings, but they enact them in virtue of following the rules of the meals structure, or maybe nothing. Okay, from this view, we may trace this line of events of food consumption from the less structured ones to the more structured ones. So we have here soylent, maybe it is not food at all. I agree with that intuition. And then we have a snack and meal. And tea ceremony is also an event of food consumption, but from her perspective, it's not a meal, right? It's a very interesting point to me. Okay. So my comments are aimed to find a place for what I will call special meals in this picture about the structure and about the meaning. What are special meals? Well, okay, there are some meals that are more than meals, and I am thinking here in a romantic dinner, for example. It is not a regular dinner, and I'm also thinking here in a business breakfast, and also a Christmas dinner. These are romeritos mexicanos, the Christmas dish typical here. Okay, these meals have more rules. Then, because of that, they imply more behavioral constraints. They have more specificities. The table, for example, have more laborious arrangements, and because they are more structured events. So my suspicion is that they are in this place, maybe. But my question to Eileen is if these kind of things count as meals in your perspective. Yeah, my worry is that the complexity of a structure is a restrictive requirement, because we may have a lot of variety of degrees in this complexity. Okay, my second point is about special meals and meaning. The meaning is also involved in a different way in a romantic dinner, for example. The meaning is explicit and experienced. It seems that you need to know that you are in a romantic dinner to be in a romantic dinner. Special meals have this self-conscious character. That's why these kind of situations are possible. You receive an invitation, you go, and then the day after you receive this message. You know, And you say, I'm sorry, I didn't notice it. I didn't know that. And, okay, this is the similar kind of mismatch, but I'm not a specialist in romantic dinners, but I think that this thesis is intuitive about them. It seems that in the case of a romantic dinner, the participant has to understand the meal in that terms in order to have that meaning. And I try to put this in Eileen's terms to see what happened with it. So, a romantic dinner similar to artworks in this way. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for that one. I really like you being willing to say Soylent is not food, and I actually would like to hear more about your grounds for saying that. The romantic dinner example is great. I think it is a much harder case for me than the tea ceremony. So I like the way you set those up. And I mean, in general, this is the kind of territory where you do need a continuum of cases. But I still, I'm not sure what to say about the romantic dinner, except your own wonderful little conversations, texts, those are texts or whatever, that kind of conversation. Fictional. They were hilarious. So yes, it's true. If you have had a romantic dinner, there has to have been a kind of integration of experience and meaning. That won't exhaust the meaning of that as a meal on my terms. You could certainly come along and say, critique the romantic dinner in a way that the participants might have been perfectly happy with it, but someone else could say, "Oh, this is like no more romance. We shouldn't be allowed to have romantic dinners. Whatever, they're harmful." That is quite possible. Okay, that it could have a meaning those participants did not acknowledge and couldn't have. But in those conversations you showed, of course, there's something about aiming to have a romantic dinner, aiming for the experience of it to generate the meaning. But with an actual romantic dinner, no one must, you don't have to find that meaning in it. There isn't really a constraint on any, this is where I find it a very good, tricky example. You're saying, yes, there is a constraint. The participants sort of they're supposed to be doing this with it. They're supposed to be generating this meaning and experiencing it. And maybe I should just grant it, but I want to say there's somehow a different way in which the tea ceremony demand is, as it were, built into the event. The romantic dinner demand is aspirational and not built into the event. It's like a risky thing. That's what your examples are showing. I would like this event to have this meaning. Will it? That's completely up in the air, I guess. Anyway, that's not a very good, I just have to think more about it, but I think you're right. It presses me in a way some of the other examples don't, I think. And I wasn't sure what you meant about the complexity of structure is a restrictive requirement, but maybe I don't want to put you on the spot.
Because it makes that special meals could be outside of the...
Oh, I see. That they can have it. Okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, then I just want to agree. Yeah, I need to think about that.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So we have plenty of time for Q&A. Aaron?
Yeah, so I was wondering about the strength of the claim. I was thinking it was plausible as like a generic meals are an art because they don't have this right integration. But as like a necessary claim, a universal claim, it seems implausible. I was wondering why you didn't discuss the Passover case. I think maybe because it's a hard case for you. it's worth distinguishing between the type and token there. So I could actually imagine, I actually think the type, if you think the Passover Seder in general, it's hard to see how you could like be a proper appreciator of the Passover Seder in general without like understanding its meaning and having that, sort of integrating that with your experience. So like ceremonial meals, and particularly the types rather than the tokens, I think they're hard cases for you. I think you should just be taken as a generic, treat your claim as a generic. But I was wondering what you think about the case. The Seder is a little bit, it isn't the tea ceremony. The tea ceremony is so weird, so distinctively different than everything else. But there are other ceremony meals, that's just what I know about.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I partly should claim, I have been to Seders, but I wouldn't say I have any ability to speak to what the relationship between the experience and the meaning is. And then you're saying, and I think I may just have to defer to you, that the Passover Seder does give the participants a responsibility to experience this meaning, and that's the responsibility that you couldn't come along. I don't know. I'm just.
It doesn't seem that different than the art case there, right? I mean, you're responsible in some sense for grasping. I mean, if you're going to properly appreciate a Passover Seder, you have to understand what the symbolism of the various foods are, what they mean, why we're doing this.
Right. I mean, I think you can just see where I'm coming from. That I am trying to say there's something undisciplined about the kind of events. There are other sorts of events like this, but I think the meal is a really good example where it's a sort of uncontainable generator of meaning. We can try pretty hard to make it mean exactly this, and I just don't think we have that power. Because this as a social event that's going to plug into all sorts of normative criteria, it's like beyond the experience of any given participant in even the Seder, I think. Anyway, so I'm just saying there's something not fixable, and I think that's a good thing. But you're right, that there are going to, I think I just have to take David's graph of it seriously, that it's like, okay, you can come really close to the art case, but if you try to fix it as, now you have the responsibility to do this, then it's just like, it's not the thing we, as it were, need from a genuine meal. We need that lack of fixity. Okay.
Thank you. So I would like to ask you to qualify the claim. So do you think that ordinary meals, so everyday meals, even special cases, are not art, or that meals cannot be? So, and that's a little bit confusing. So Mohan presented an example where a meal is part of a performance in which, that seems to be pretty suitable to be an object of art. So do you think that it's because there's too much structure and then it does not fall into the art, or you're only concerned with our ordinary, including Passover and Christmas meals consideration?
Well, I guess I'm trying to I'm trying to say art is quite ambitious in a particular way, where it's saying, okay, here's a focus of attention and experience, and you have a job to do. You are supposed to get inside this offering and do full justice to it. And it's actually, there's some kind of constraint on what the features of the event are that would be relevant to doing full justice to it. I mean, it's really complicated, and like the meal of art event, I mean, however I can describe it, it sounds like it has a very unusual demand that it's placing on the audience. In fact, that they sort of participate in a certain way, but still they're being asked to do quite a particular thing that involves their own experience. And I'm just trying to say, I think meals conceptually are, they map out a different possibility of how we can relate to our experience. And I don't know, I mean, I can tell, it's like maybe this just seems ridiculously rigid, but I don't know. I feel for some reason interested in saying, no, I am not willing to turn meals into art. They're interestingly different. Should I?
So they may be interestingly different, right? But I think that the appropriate comparison class is in fact immersive art rather than art in which the audience is outside the artwork. But I just want to ask you a question about the Mary Douglas. Is that her name? Yeah. So she claims that biscuits recapitulate celebratory foods. Right? And you say that having a biscuit at night doesn't involve that experience. So let's concede the latter part anyway, that it does not involve that experience. So what's the truth conditions of, suppose I said, oh, bunk. So what's the evidence that Mary Douglas would provide to show, I mean, sure, the biscuit has layers and so it sort of reminds you, but that's not enough of a truth condition, right?
So I agree with you. I picked it partly because I think it's a provocative, ambitious claim about the biscuit and the cup of tea. What she's going to turn to, or what she does, it's actually a pretty long discussion. There's much more. She returns to this, is the substance, like the materials that show up in the puddings are in the biscuits too, the icing, the fruits, the fruits that are in the wet puddings are also in a number of the biscuits, dried out. I mean, she has a whole bunch of things to say about wet to dry, visually undifferentiated to differentiated, or discriminable. And so she's hoping she can build an argument for the relationship of these elements that's patterned. So it's not just the biscuit, there are other elements that are following this, well, similar patterns where you get more dry as the day goes on, and so forth. So I agree. I don't know.
You can easily imagine that occurring in a very funny satirical piece about British life, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking about this talk to the person who cuts my hair. And, you know, she actually has a number of really good things to say about it, but I partly wanted, because she is British, and I didn't grow up. And she said, I do that. I have a biscuit every night before bed. She said, I carry biscuits in my purse so that I will not have to go without. And then she said, so I said, oh, well, what do you think you're doing? I mean, it's a terrible question. And she,
sorry, what is your question?
I mean, I just asked her, what do you think? I asked her the question I think you shouldn't ask, in a way. Like, what do you think you're doing? Does it mean something? And I think she was mainly intrigued by the question. And she said she is now a bit unusual in her family that she did this, everyone did it when she was growing up, and she's kind of a last holdout. And she said, well, it's a kind of security. That's not the same as Douglas's claim, but I think she was willing to probe the depths of it. Okay, but so let me just say, you're pressing something that I think is very worth pressing with these meaning claims. Sometimes they probably do, there might be this constraint that somehow, if you put the participants in the meals in the unusual position of reflecting on what they've been doing, it couldn't be completely unthinkable to them. So maybe I'd have to say there is a route back to participants' understanding, but it just doesn't have to inform their participation in the meals, but maybe sometimes it would, like I think the Finkelstein claim about, we're actually not being very sociable when we go out to a restaurant to eat. I think one reason I use that example is I found it kind of powerful. I thought, oh, I think I'm going out in the public sphere, but I'm going out in this super protected way. I don't have to talk to anyone if I don't want to, et cetera, et cetera. So that meant, I think I am a bit, my own thinking about this would be relevant to how she could defend that claim. So it is messier than I was saying.
Alona?
Yes, thank you, Lynn. I really, really like your paper. And one of the reasons why I liked it was because, I mean, it's normally assumed, certainly in this conference, many of us assume that when, I mean, there's something like food art, the object of appreciation of that kind of art or whatever would be the food itself, right? And you're basically asking us to consider another object of appreciation, namely the meal. And, you know, appreciating these objects involve understanding a more complex structured event, which includes food, of course, but it's not limited to that. So there are many other things that contribute to the meaning. Now, I wanted to ask you whether you would consider the people who participate in the meal as part of the object of appreciation and their interactions, perhaps, and if they are they kind of like actors in a play? And that, I mean, if they are, that may explain why they may not get the meaning, because they are part of it, unless they, you know, they experience the meal afterwards or think about it afterwards. So I don't know. I wanted to hear what you wanted to say.
Yeah. So that's really nice. And in fact, you framed it in a way that I probably haven't framed it in my mind, which is, what is it to appreciate a meal? Because I've been thinking much more about understanding a meal. And to appreciate a meal, I suppose the experiences of the participants matter quite a bit, but in this odd way, not because their experience has to match the appreciative criteria. It has to maybe contribute to it or help constitute what the meal is. But what it is to appreciate a meal, obviously I'm trying to say the criteria are just, they are not the same as art criteria. You know, they can include art criteria because the food, in fact, or the place settings and so on could amount to art. But the appreciation of the meal, like evaluating meals, I think that's going to be sort of purpose specific. And I think you're right, that it might in fact involve taking a very odd perspective on the experiences of the participants. So they'd be relevant, but just not in the art way. So I just hadn't thought about that question enough, or really at all. But I like, and maybe, is it too weird to think that we are sort of actors? It's just that we are helping to constitute our own lives. It's not like pretend. No, that's sort of my point. That we're really enacting some meanings. It's just not really going via the art route. In which
I wasn't. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I wasn't meaning that actors as people pretending, but as constitutors of the constitutive parts of the work or whatever, or the object. Right. So,
yeah. Okay. I think I just need to think more about what the male participants are. What are they doing? What's the Thank you.
Martin?
So this is a little bit to clarify what the picture is. So I took you to be trying to pin down this phenomenon that is the phenomenon of meals that is like meaningful for certain reasons, what have you. And it seems maybe this is stronger than what you said, but I'm just going to use this because I think it's clear. So I took you to be claiming that it is constitutive of meals that they are not art, partly because it is constitutive of meals not to be ambitious and in the kind of way that characterizes. So maybe like I can have a very ambitious meal because I really want to impress my mom or something like that. But that's not the kind of ambition. Maybe that's some kind of ambitiousness in the preparation of the food, but it's not really the kind of ambitiousness that of the meal itself or something like that, or something. And I was wondering if you think that it is constitutive of meals that they are not ambitious in the kind of way that characterizes art, because meals are kind of like an ordinary, like a thing that happens very regularly. Like maybe romantic dinners don't happen as regularly, but it's still like not exactly one of a kind. So I was just wondering if you think that regularity or some kind of ordinary character of meals is partly constitutive of what it is to be a meal, and that is also one of the reasons why you think they cannot constitutively meals as such. For that reason, having to do with regularity, that they cannot be one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll say first, I think I emphasized a certain kind of ambitiousness of art works, and what I didn't do effectively is, I think meals are equally ambitious, but more in what they achieve rather than in what we are trying to do in them. We don't, I mean, as you say, and I think David was saying, we can be very ambitious for a given meal. We can aim for it to have a certain personal meaning and so on. But I'm trying to say, as a meal, we don't control that. So I might, anyway, give a political meaning to the romantic dinner and so on that the participants wouldn't acknowledge. The meal, but then I really like what you're saying about regularity. I think that how do you get cultural meaning into your life? You don't do it by having a single structured meal. You do it by not even thinking about the fact that you do a certain thing for breakfast, or don't have breakfast at all. But you do have these another. And that regularity that you do not have to think about is part of what hooks you into a practice in which certain things are salient or deprioritized or valued, or but you don't have to be doing the valuing, the prioritizing, it's happening through what you do over and over and over. Now I don't have much anything sophisticated to say about the regularity, but I do want to say that's really important, and it's a different kind of context for generation of meaning than the striking artwork that moves you and shifts the way you think about something. That's just that's an ambitiousness that art can have. Regular dinners don't have that, but they're ambitious in another way.
Patrick?
Yes, I wanted to maybe try like a middle way between the let's say exterior appreciation of meals as artwork and the kind of immersive art that's being proposed. So, the initial question is, how should we conceive your idea of experience of integration of meaning and appreciation? Is it something that's occurrent, or is it something that can be dispositional? So in the sense that, you know, you enjoy the artwork, and then I ask you, why do you value this? And then you give me an explanation that's an explanation of integration, of meaning and appreciation. Or is it required that as I appreciate the artwork, I consciously and actively try to integrate? So that's just it's an initial question, and then depending on your answer, then
follow up. I mean, if it's a temporal question, like, do I have to do it all at once? Of course not. You know, it's just that whatever you end up doing as in your appreciation, it has to be coming out of your experience and the understanding you've developed that makes use of that experience. But it's true, it could happen over time.
So, but in case of narrative works, you know, one of it is immersion, and when you immerse, you're not integrating. So if you immersed into the movie and the novel, and I come saying, "Are you really integrating?" And that would be a kind of, you know, disturbing. But think of these great meals you had, you know, very memorable. And you say, "Why? Yeah, well, you know, it's an integration of the fact that there was friendship, there was these moments where I learned something, you know, I wouldn't have suspected about someone. Then someone, you know, told this very touching story, but food was great, wine was great." And you say, "Oh, then I integrate this stuff into a sort of very complex panel of, in a very short span time, actually, you have a lot of different values and emotions." And, you know, I would say, well, I sort of realized that as I was having dinner, that was my appreciation.
So that might relate to the Licha example, where she's looking back on her childhood. She's well into adulthood, looking back on childhood and saying, "Oh, my mother like fed us food that carried love and carried maybe a blessing." And I'm saying, well, that would not have been part of the child's understanding of the meal. But you could say, well, why doesn't she get that time in her life to come to an appreciation of those childhood meals, you know, which I'm letting her do here in this example. And how is that different from, am I on the right track of what you're saying? I suppose that
The problem is maybe, you know, with children, it's really, you know, it seems like a post-hoc personalization. But the dinner I had last week, sort of pretty, you know, I had the attitude I was having during the meal. It's not exactly the attitude I have, you know, when I have, you know, lunch with my colleagues. I had an attitude that was a bit more different. And
so let's suppose you've had this wonderful meal, and you've kind of savored it and thought about it and come to an understanding of how nice it was to have these friends together and to have that kind of food together. And so you say, I'm doing this integrative thing, and I just want to say, great, I'm glad you had this nice experience that you can integrate. I just don't think that's the meaning of that meal. Like, or that's not the answer to a question posed by that meal. It doesn't pose that kind of question. It may be that that's what you make of it, but it would be completely fine for someone else to layer on all kinds of other meanings to it, and you couldn't object, no, that's not what it meant. I didn't take it that way. You just don't have the control over its meaning, even if you are generating an experience-laden understanding and appreciation of it. But that's not
Can I say one last thing? Yeah. So if you take the Wolham bit you had at the end, the critique as being the one who's supposed to tell us something about the artwork in such a way that we can attend to it in a way that makes it valuable to attend to it. But I'm saying in that case that I'm pointing to features of the meal that, you know, if you look at, if you experience the meal by pointing to these features, you look at it as being an instance of value.
Mm-hmm. So you're trying to help me out by saying, be more flexible. Maybe, you know, that you can have this model that I am assigning to art in the context of a meal, and you should just accept that. I'm resisting the thought that you can determine that any one participant in a meal, because of the experience they had of it, can claim, I have done justice to the meaning of this meal. I just don't think that's where the meaning of it comes from. It comes from like this fitting into a larger practice that's going to soak up meaning from sources I don't control, and I may not even have any awareness of. And I think I just think we need things like that in order not to have lives in which we are just sort of generating the appreciative understanding and meaning of our lives. That actually won't work. Or we'd have very weird, depleted lives. It's kind of a downer if we're ending the conversation.
Okay, we still have some time. Anybody else?
Well, how would you distinguish between a food critic and an art critic? Isn't the object of analysis of a food critic a meal, and more specifically the execution of a particular ambition by the chef and the performance of that chef and the restaurant as a whole? And then secondly, I was curious what for you the relationship of narrative is to meaning, because it seems to me the meaning in these artworks, the Chicago, the Da Vinci, even Seder, depend, and then also the retroactive construction of meaning in the Licha is highly dependent on her creating this oral history, right, this narrative. So I don't know if that's a fully formed question, but
yeah. So
and food criticism is a narrative too.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the food critic could be evaluating the food. And when they're doing that, I mean, as we've seen in the various talks, it's not exactly easy to say when what they're doing would be evaluation of art. But I think they could be evaluating food as art. And then they are going to be focusing on the food and its aesthetic features and perhaps the meaning of the food. They will have to be doing this kind of attentive scrutiny of the food for its experiential possibilities and so on. But you said, well, the food critic actually is often giving us a bigger horizon, like what is it like to eat at this restaurant? And I just want to say, well, that is one. So then I think they are expanding beyond the food. They might still be, it still could be what you might call art criticism, because so much of what a restaurant does is try to structure an experience aesthetically and so on. Okay, so it could be that. Maybe, but what I otherwise have to say is the food criticism is going to be one route into the meaning of a meal. And it's just not exhaustive. It's one thing we're interested in. The food critics sense of what's valuable in these food events, but they can't settle. That will just be one route into the meal, and there will be lots and lots of other things that matter to why that. As Finkelstein is doing, she's saying, well, the whole phenomenon of eating at a restaurant has possibilities for, social meaning that really would not show up in attention to the food or the beauty of the linens and so on. Oh, but you were asking about narrative, so I guess, I don't think all art meaning has to be narrative. But you're right, a lot of what I've been talking about does have that sort of anchor for meaning. I'm not sure. So are you saying, suppose all of these people who are attributing meaning to meals of this sprawling kind of in a sprawling way, why don't you say they are all sort of generating a kind of artistic structure themselves, a narrative? Is that what you were?
I guess it's one possibility. But it's striking to me that the Chicago was relying on these narratives of excluded women from history, and then the Da Vinci, the narrative of the life and death of Christ. And then Seder, of course, the symbolic narrative of the salty food representing pain and oppression, and then the fact that for you meaning is generated by Nietzsche in this oral narrative constructed years later.
Yeah, I suppose
I'm a literary scholar.
Yeah. So this may not be helpful, but I guess I would say, like, what I think of as literary narratives are the narratives where you're supposed to do this thing where you look at the elements for meaning, like what they are offering to the whole. And let's take Leach's narrative, although there's a way in which it's not a good narrative in that she's saying quite different things along the way. She's bringing up aesthetic qualities. She's bringing up familial love. She's bringing up religious significance. What I didn't quote is she's talking about environmental changes that have affected what could be eaten. And it's in a way, part of what I liked about her passage is it's too much. So I don't think it would make a good literary narrative. And that's relevant to me to why it is a good account of a meal or a meal practice, but not an art work or an art experience.
Well, it's a little bit more ethnographic, right? If it's an oral history rather than something she has shaped into a memoir.
Yeah. That's
okay. Great. We're finishing right in time.
Okay.
So help me.
Thanks.